CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, President Biden announced the U.S. will ban Russian energy as a way to punish Moscow. Let's first listen to what the president had to say earlier today.
This is a step that we're taking to inflict further pain on Putin, but there will be cost as well here in the United States. I said I would level with the American people from the beginning. And when I first spoke to this, I said defending freedom is going to cost. It's going to cost us as well. If we do not respond to Putin's assault on global peace and stability today, the cost of freedom and to the American people will be even greater tomorrow.
Ed, we know that less than 10% of the oil that the U.S. uses comes from Russia, but this is still a much harsher take from the president than what we saw a couple of weeks ago. What has changed in this short time?
The political will to do this. There's an understanding across the country that if this is what it takes to screw Vladimir Putin, to tighten the screws on him, or really just to screw him, I guess that's frankly a sentiment many Americans feel, then so be it. There was an incredible poll out yesterday. More than 7 in 10 Americans say ban Russian oil imports if need be, even if it means a price hike. And that same poll said that the Biden administration wasn't going far enough to sanction the Putin regime. So there appears to be political will. What the president's anticipating in those statements there is that once people start going to the gas pump, once they start having to pay more for goods and services because the cost is being passed on to the consumer, the ire is going to turn its way back towards this White House, and he's going to say, remember, as he said there, Putin's price hike, a phrase we're probably going to hear a lot more of, is what's causing this. And if he can continue to keep Americans understanding, in the White House's view, that it's because of that the prices have gone up, they're hoping the political pain won't be so hard. But we should point out, for example, the RNC, the Republican National Committee today, saying that under Joe Biden, families are paying more for gas than ever before. After killing American energy independence, Biden is turning to our adversaries abroad for America's energy needs. Families are feeling the pain at the pump, and Biden and Democrats do not care and are making it worse. That's the kind of attack Democrats and the president are going to continue to hear. Senator Chris Murphy last night on Capitol Hill was saying they're all for banning the oil, and they're going to be with us on that. Hit them hard with the sanctions. But then they're going to turn around and campaign against this White House and Democrats for raising prices when they knew the full potential cost of this. So you're going to see this expectation setting on both sides, trying to manage the expectations of the American people who are going to end up paying a lot more. Some estimates this morning we're seeing this gas increase, if it hits $5 an average, if not more in some parts of the country, is going to cost families as much as $2,000 more per year to fill up the tank, on top of the $1,000 more they may be paying on average at the grocery store over the course of the year because of inflation. So that's $3,000 in additional costs to American working families in a midterm election year at a time when confidence in the economy is already pretty bad, despite the fact that economic indicators have shown and the unemployment rate has shown that the economy overall has been in pretty good shape.
So, Ed, of course, President Biden is a smart man, and he's aware of all of this, right? He's aware of being caught between a rock and a hard place here. So what is his plan to sell this to the American people in terms of the pain that they're feeling now and will continue to feel at the pump? Obviously he's going to, as long as he can, hinge it on Ukraine. But at what point will that political will subside?
It's a good question, and I think it's going to depend on how long the American appetite remains to be paying a higher price, with an understanding that it's because of this conflict that was started by the Russian leader. But we've seen in recent days the administration do a handful of things. For one thing, continue to call on Congress to pass the economic legislation that he'd like to see passed. Another, now apparent outreach to countries like Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the ongoing nuclear talks with Iran to end its, or at least to curb its nuclear weapons ambitions, because by doing that and talking to those countries, they could potentially replenish the global supply to a point where the price can at least be stabilized or brought down overall. Even if the United States isn't buying Venezuelan, Iranian, or UAE oil and gas, it could be replenishing other parts of the world such that overall the price of gas will come down. And watch especially how this administration decides to engage with Saudi Arabia in the coming weeks. They're the ones, energy analysts say, who could turn on the spigot, boost supply overall to the world, and help bring that price down. But that's going to require diplomacy and outreach that this administration has not necessarily been willing to give, given that President Biden, when he was a candidate, and still believes, apparently, that the royal family there and the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is someone with whom he doesn't want to do business, and that he considers a killer for, among other things, the death of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Ed O'Keefe, a lot to look at and a lot to watch out for, especially how all of these tough decisions play out in the midterms. Thank you for joining us, Ed O'Keefe, at the White House.